here for Go Engineer. I'm working, at least you guys up front here anyway. I handle all technical services for Go Engineer, so I'm doing all things PDM, PLM, solvers, electrical. And what I do when I'm supposed to be sleeping is build custom electric guitars. So this presentation was originally requested for a product called SolidWorks Cell. I put a presentation on a couple of years back with that. That was a kind of a 3D experience type product that was an add-in for SolidWorks that did something similar to this. It's no longer a product. They hit me up and said, well, I'm sure we can probably turn it into something. I contacted Greg, who's a DriveWorks expert for us here. And, he's graciously put together my guitar configuration in the last couple of weeks here into DriveWorks product. So the goal of today's presentation is to kind of show what you can do with the DriveWorks product line with respect to product configuration. Right? I think there's a few levels of this. Right? What we're kind of showcasing today is a business model around the guitar, and the premise of this is pre-configured options. Right? So this isn't, online, draw your own body style and it magically spits the guitar out from a bar napkin sketch, although you call me, I do that, right? But DriveWorks, not so much, right? This is more about calling, the existing possible configurations that already exist for that sale. In this particular case, we're not actually even calling up the CAD model and altering the configurations, and we'll kind of get to some of the details of that as we move forward. But there is kind of that next level where you're calling different CAD models, swapping out assemblies, sub-assemblies, and things with DriveWorks as well. You can drive dimensions with DriveWorks as you interrogate the model, to be able to create, model designs that have not been created yet for sizes and things, as well as drawings, things of that nature. The other thing that's going to be a part of this is DriveWorks Live, which is going to be pushing it up onto a website. We didn't have time to get actually everything up to a live website that you can go play with on your phone. But product can absolutely do that. Greg's going to be running it off the intranet website off of his laptop at this point, but the same idea works in HTML code on the internet. So, got a few slides to kind of kick things off, and then we'll jump into the configuration side of things as a whole. One of the first things I bring up is this: I'm from Angola, Indiana. We've got a Moe's in town that moved there a few years ago. And this sign is hanging up behind where they make your quesadilla, burrito, bowl, whatever you get, right? And it triggered my engineer brain going, how many zeros is that, right? And I was like, how'd they get to that number? So it's 17 quintillion, if you can't read that up there, but it's in little parentheses down here. And really, how do you get to that number? And it's surprising how fast that number grows. So it's just the number of options for a particular thing times the number of options for the particular thing times the number of options for a particular thing, which isn't that crazy of a calculation, but it grows really, really quickly. So with this idea, let's say we make signs. We make signs that are up, left, down, and right arrows. We make red, green, blue, and yellow arrows. How many different combinations of arrows and colors can I have? Pop quiz, anybody? What was that? I think you said it up front. 16, right? 4 different arrows, 4 different colors. We can have 16 different arrow combinations. And then you kind of take that to more of a complex, and not even that complex of a model or option styles. We have 4 different body styles. This guy's the Inferno. We got the Element is the blue flame one. The Havoc is the natural wood one, and there's also an Ignition. We'll see that in here, but different example. But 4 different body styles to choose from. 3 different pickup styles. So there's a dual humbucker, a single coil, all of them, and a single coil and a humbucker. 2 different headstock styles. You'll see on the Element has the rounded one, and I think the other 2 have the sharp. So nothing crazy so far, right? 3 different hardware options where you can have chrome, black, or gold. 3 different fretboard materials: rosewood, mahogany, maple. How am I doing so far? I'm recalling this pretty well. 3 different body colors.
So we can either have paint, we can have maple, we can have mahogany. 3 headstock colors, same idea here. So that takes us to 1,944. That's a lot of different combinations of them. And that kind of put the ellipses there as we said, one's just paint, right? When you get into paint, well, let's just say we're calling it RGB. I mean, we didn't even do the numbers because it went into.
I multiplied this out before we started with the scientific notation, right? So that's how much this grows, right? But I purposely kind of want to pause at the 1900 number, not counting paint, right? Because it gets so astronomical as you start to customize paint. And one of the things that I really want to kind of hone in on here is from a product design perspective, how you tackle this in SolidWorks, right? So super early on in SolidWorks, I thought configurations were the coolest thing that they had in the entire software. I configured everything that I could get my hands on. And as I got into data management, I realized that's not such a great plan, right? You can't rep control configurations individually, and you run into a number of problems. Particularly without the data management portion of this, if you just think about the guitar itself, we're talking a 20 meg, body or so, probably another 10 or 15 into the neck. By the time you add all of that tessellated data together, that's probably a 50 meg assembly, right? And if you know configurations well in SolidWorks, you'll know whatever your baseline is, every time you add a config, it's adding that file size to the model. There's some settings that you can do to have that offload the information. But ultimately, if you offload the file size, you're waiting for it to load every time you change configurations. So you're going to eat that data load into RAM no matter what you do. If you take 50 meg assembly, right, times almost 2,000 configurations, this model is gigantic, right? Worse, I've had customers call me like, okay, so we configured our product like crazy, and now I need, Joe in engineering and Bob in engineering to work on it at the same time. Sorry, there's one file in Windows, right? And it's in use, so nobody can go modify these things without doing a saving, right? So you end up in a situation where when you get to a heavily configured situation with SolidWorks, you run into design and engineering limitations of Windows throughput, the number of users that can touch it, file management, revision control, and a lot of things downstream that tons of our customers are running into at a machine design level, things of that nature. So that's where the idea kind of came from for the presentation was, I've always thought, I've been building guitars since I was 18 years old, and I've always wanted a 3D model to spin around on the screen as the end customer can customize it live on the internet, right? I went to web developers for this, like in the late 90s and early 2000s. They were like, sure, we can do this with JavaScripting for $1 million. I'm like, yeah, no, right? And I went rounds and rounds and turned into Flash with a bunch of pictures. And the CAD model guy in me was just like, no, this has got to be easy, right? Like, there's a CAD model of this thing. There's got to be a way to port that to the web, right? And very few softwares are actually capable of getting it there, right? If you look at a lot of configurator products on the market, at best, they might come up with a picture of this thing. But now, for that to be accurate, you've got to have all 1,944 of those pictures available for that picture to be accurate when it pulls up on the internet, right? So one of the things that's really important to understand about what DriveWorks does here is it saves all of the individual parts as their respective, product, but then lifetime changes what you're seeing on the screen in a 3D model over the internet, and it's doing so with a super lightweight file, right? And that's what's making it portable to the web. This isn't a 50 meg assembly that we're trying to push to your phone to this thing to spin around, right? It's a super lightweight deal, and Greg will pull up some of those files as we move forward. So all I did was effectively hand Greg my models and a couple of pictures of what the end product looks like, and he took it in. And I think grand total, including some hack and slash work at the hotel earlier today, we were somewhere around like 12, 13 hours.
12, 13 hours is what I've got into this.
Just to put in perspective, as you get people what's available here. So I'll let Greg take away when he's done to configure the model for DriveWorks.
So we start where we always start, especially at a user group like this in SolidWorks, right? So we're not building models separately in a different tool like DriveWorks. We're building the models in SolidWorks. We're just using them in a different tool called DriveWorks. So John handed me the models, and one of the first things you want to do is what I like to do is just strip the model of all appearances. Sounds a little backwards, but that's what works really well. You strip the model of all of its appearances, and then you start to, the planning stage of this is pretty important because you have to decide what changes and how. So that PowerPoint I brought up of body styles, head stock styles, hardware styles, that's how I'm going to group this in DriveWorks as well. And so let's say I just want to get the body out at first. It's going to be really easy. I take this model, I back it up first, right? Do a pack and go because I'm gonna really mess with this guy, and I'm going to suppress all of the components that I don't want to be a part of the body section of it. And when I'm happy with it, maybe I take out the pickups, I take out, you guys get the idea. We run through this model and determine what we want the body to be. And the body changes between the 4 different models, and it changes color. So that's one good section to bring out. And when I'm happy with that, when you install DriveWorks, it comes with a new export type when you do a file save as. And it's going to be right at the top of the tree. And this is the file that John was talking about. That's a really lightweight file called a .drive3d file. So it takes this and saves it out as a mostly graphics file. So I've already got a few of those exported. So let's take a peek at that alone, not even opening it in DriveWorks. DriveWorks has its own viewer to kind of view it, make sure it's what you want before you stick it into DriveWorks and configure it. So this exact Tritone Inferno, this is just the DriveWorks 3D viewer. I guess I should point out the file size as well. That is a close to what, 20 meg file? And if you look at the SolidWorks file for that same thing, yeah, I don't know where the assembly's at, but you got all the components as well. The body itself is 17, right? So it's really, really reducing this. But when you do a save as from SolidWorks, you have the option to either strip out all of the appearances and just get it gray, and in DriveWorks you can control the appearances, or you can use SolidWorks to apply your appearances. And when you do that save to Drive3D file, it brings the appearances with it. And then moving this guy around in 3D space, pretty lightweight.
So that process that Greg and I went through with this, right? I sent over my models, and then we had like kind of an interview process for what is going to change on this, right? It's the tech trying to implement DriveWorks over the top of the product, right? He's not intimate with what's going to change on that. And I had to define, well, what's hardware? And what's going to change to chrome and black and gold, right? Like, what color do pickups become? What are the different options that Greg listed off at kind of the beginning of the presentation? And that's what we need from a customer that's trying to get this off the ground, right? If you want to hand this over to who've already built this, right? We need to have your intimate knowledge of your product to be able to put that into DriveWorks to capture all the information, right? And that's probably the most time-intense part of the whole process, right? Is you have to know what you want to get this automation back out of the software, right? And unfortunately, what we found in many DriveWorks engagements with customers is they actually don't know what they want yet. They think this is a cool idea, they have a configurable product, right? And they have no idea how deep the rabbit hole goes when the conversation starts, right? And then as you keep adding more and more possible configurations and complexities, the project, scope grows, right? So the main goal from a Go engineer standpoint is as we take on the DriveWorks project, is to bring, an admin up to speed on how it all works. So we're teaching you how to configure this system forward. That way you don't have to keep coming back to Go engineer to get, more and more features built into your model.
So with that, this is my Drive3D folder of all of those lightweight files, and they're broken down into bodies. The body cover, which is this guy on the back. The different fretboards, the different hardware that changes, the headstocks, the pickups. So those exact parentheses things that we're multiplying together, I don't have to have one of every of 1,900 of these. I can have the 12 different body options that you have because of the bodies and pickups that are cut into it, right? And then those get put into DriveWorks and we switch between those based on what's needed. Okay, so the next piece of that is putting it into, this is DriveWorks Administrator. It's where you build your projects. So I'm actually going to jump out of running this and show you the first thing that you do is build your forms. It looks a little crazy, but it's actually really easy to use. So I can make a brand new form, add a form, give it a name, and let's say that I want to have a check mark box for whether or not we have, give me something, John. An optional check mark box.
Yeah, like you could do like an additional cap switch or something,
Custom inlay. I grab a control. You can see all the controls that we have available up top. Check mark boxes, drop down lists, date pickers. So if you're like asking a customer for when they expect this, sliders, you'll see a lot of these in the current project. I'm just going to call it custom inlay, and I drop it in there. So drag it around, it has snaps, and everything about that control that I just dropped in, its appearance, what it looks like, when it's checked, when it's not checked, is it default checked, that kind of stuff. I can't have a custom inlay if I'm choosing one of these signature models, so I can turn off this checkmark box if other selections are made. So a lot of the logic is built in here. Okay? So looking at the first piece that I did was just body style. So I threw in some just basic labels like the element, havoc, ignition, inferno, and then these are actually option groups. So you've seen these before. You'll know them as like radio buttons. And to add different radio button options, we use this rule builder. I won't get too far into it, but I just write a pipe delimited list. So a name, the pipe bar, which is the key right above enter, and then another name. And I can build as many options as I want to into that option group. So that's all these are. But I told each one of these controls, hey, don't be text and a radio button, be a picture. And here's what I want the picture to look like when it's not selected. Here's what I want it to look like when it's selected. So that's it on the first page. And then I have a page that just holds all of the different graphical elements. So this window right here changes based on when I hit next, next, next. Okay? This window right here is the magic that we've been seeing, right? I'm telling DriveWorks to pull up a different combination of body, neck, headstock, hardware, pickups. I'm telling DriveWorks to pick those options based on what somebody's selected. Make sense? So what that looks like is this where it starts. The first time it goes to grab that model, it takes a second, but then as we make switches, it updates pretty quickly. And it's exactly what you saw in the its own viewer, is that I can move this guy around pretty quickly, zoom in, zoom out, take a peek at what I've configured so far. So switching between the element and the havoc and the different body styles is pretty quick.
It's worth noting like the hardware configuration, right, changes per instrument, right? So exactly where all the knobs go and things relative to the holes, right? So Greg's got a body, or a 3D, DriveWorks file saved out for that, but it's not each individual part, right? It's what he left on the screen and said save this out as, right? And it basically makes, for lack of a better term, a subassembly that we can swap out of the background, right?
If you blink, you'll miss it. If you blink, you'll miss it, but you'll actually see that the fretboard and all the strings and things stay as the body gets swapped, kind of. But you saw all this stuff stayed, the body just swapped out. And I'll show you that in a second, how you tell DriveWorks to do those kinds of things. So we pick the style that we want. Then it comes to our pickup style. And so this these black pieces in the middle here, as we pick, we change it to single coils or a single and a humbucker. And again, this presentation is about it being, that one's a little off. Don't mind the man behind the curtain. So this is a sales configurator. So not only are we driving what someone's seeing here, but we're capturing this information in the background to be able to create a quote at the end. And the pricing can change based on the quote. We're going to collect the customer's information at the end. So we'll hit next, and then we can change between the shape. Probably should have zoomed up there first. Change between the rounded and the sharp. And then the crazy screen, right? We'll kind of go back to see it in the whole guitar here. But our appearance styles. We have this, what's like maybe popular styles that you might have. We're calling them the signature series. And if you pick the Inferno body type, you can pick to just, all right, set it all for me. I want that predetermined one. And it goes and pulls that Drive 3D file for that exact model. Or, and this is kind of the case of what it actually is. We just did that to show, but all these are just, every single one of them is a custom one. So we can choose between body appearance of paint, or mahogany, or maple, and you're seeing I'm turning on and off controls based on what I'm selecting up top here. So if I have mahogany or maple, I'm not changing the color of this, the paint color, it's not painted. But if I choose paint, then I've just got 3 sliders here for red, green, blue values that I can move around, get myself a swatch if I want. I see the red, green, blue values down below. Maybe we'll make them top mahogany, and we want a maple fretboard. Looks a little, I don't know, a little 70s maybe. And then again, the black and chrome changing the appearance of the hardware.
So not only do you get to custom dial in your color off of RGB, but that's going to feed the quote later, right? I get to walk right up to a painter and say, mix that, right? So it's not a debate on whether or not the color is right? Customer picks it live online relative to what they see on the monitor. Right?
There we go.
And I'll tell you without this, I've built a bunch of guitars, and it's tricky, right? The customer's like, I want it blue. I'm like, cool, there's 70 million shades of blue. Which one do you want, right? And they'll send me a picture, and then what am I supposed to do with it? I bring it to a painter, and it's like, well, do I show them on my phone? Is that accurate? Do I print this thing out? Is my printer accurate? Did I actually translate this color to the paint guy right? You know, and at the end of the day, like I went back and forth because Detroit Choppers is the guys who paint my guitars. I went back and forth with them, and he's finally just like, well, we got a machine that just RGBs this. I'm like, cool. Here's 3 numbers, man. Like, and we're gold now, you know. And it took a long time to dial in. It makes the whole process really easy to deal with.
Much better here. I'm going a little Jimi Hendrix vibe now. Maybe a little Prince style. The underrated guitarist. Then, kind of, again, going towards that sales configurator idea, we have built in just drop-down boxes and boxes that we can type into for contact information. All right, you want to buy a guitar? Like, we need to contact you or fill out a quote. So we can pick what band you're with. So we're going to go with the English Stars. Jeanette Dean's ordering it, and it automatically fills out the city, state, and country because they bought one before. But I can immediately, with just a checkmark box, entering a new customer, I can just have those be fill-out boxes. So Greg Dawes wants this. What band am I a part of? Oh, geez. The Revolution. Nobody? Prince? Okay. Greg Dawes.
He's gone off to a database that's just a table inside of DriveWorks there to show like the drop list that you did before. But it is possible to store all that in DriveWorks as you go, or if you have that off in a CRM or something, DriveWorks does have web API capabilities to go pull SQL queries and things out of existing databases, right? So that information can pull from existing data sources as well. I'd say DriveWorks, storing the data if you don't already have it is the easiest place to put all that information by far. DriveWorks is very powerful at storing information in tables, and then the calls become super easy to it, right? It's just line 3, column B, and show that information downstream on a code or whatever it might be, right? And like I'll point out at this point, like how crucial this is to in my opinion, a custom guitar business, right? I got this idea originally back when I was like 18, 19 years old, and everybody and their brother wanted a custom guitar. And your options back 20 years ago were call Fender and get on a waiting list for 4 years, right? And then maybe if you pay them enough, they'll stop the production line and build you a custom one, right? And you fast forward to today, and it's still call Fender and get on a wait list for 7 years now, right? Like the business model has not changed behind it, right? And it hasn't changed because like electric guitar was effectively like solidified in the 50s and what was available on the market. And since then, like there's a ton of people coming up building like custom one-offs. Like to put in perspective, like what you see here happens in my house, folks, right? Like I've got a CNC machine and a vacuum table to it, and I cut all these things, and then I take them down the street and have them custom painted at a motorcycle shop, right? And I can turn and burn a brand new custom instrument off of that CNC machine in 8 hours. All the code is done for this stuff, right? If you're picking off of my list of custom bodies, you get to choose from 1,900 options. I get to hit cut as soon as I know what it's made out of, right? And then it's just a matter of I got to grab all that paint information to get that over to the painter, which is going to be at least a week out from when I cut the thing and get it all glued together. And the worst part of it, by far, for turnaround time, is waiting on the painter, right? Because he's got to spray this thing 15 coats or something, it has to cure in between, and then get wet sanded in between to get that gloss coat on it. To the point where if you're doing this a lot like they do, they have a UV bake oven to get this thing out the next day. Because otherwise, each coat can take 7 to 10 days to cure before you can sand it, right? So like the time to market is all about paint for the guitar. And I don't want to spend time procuring, what the customer wants, right? If we can do this live time, right? And the idea behind, capturing the customer information is if you just want to come play around on the website and build your own one-off, go for it, right? But if you want a quote, I want your email address, right? I want your contact information, right? And we're going to capture all that as we go. But even more important to that quote, we've captured that custom build the whole way through, right? So any given settings that they chose, whatever you've given them as options, becomes what's on the quote downstream. And one of the things I've heard in the industry that is like just a giant problem is you have salespeople out selling equipment or products, right, that doesn't match company standards because it's just what the customer wants, right? And then my favorite industry term becomes a thing called the custom standard. It's just like this one, except it's different, right? And then they come back to engineering and they ask you to make it like this one, right? Except change it all, And that's exactly what DriveWorks does, right? You can go in and get all of those configurations, right? And capture all that stuff. And then if that gets handed off to an engineer that now has to do another 10, 15% of the change because that wasn't part of the configurator, DriveWorks can spit out the models and then, give it a name and everything to send over to engineering to then, finish the part that's not automated downstream, right? That's not particularly what we did here. In my case, I don't need your model at all, right? If you want custom paint, you want all the different options we talked about. The code for the CNC machine doesn't change, right? It's not until I start carving your name in it or putting a picture of your kid on it that I need to start altering code, right? And even then, the body style remains the same, And at the end of the day, like, you could even have a form that lets them upload their own picture if they want to draw a bar napkin sketch and send it to you, right? Turnaround time and cost on that change, but like, you can literally capture anything you want on the way in and feed your CRM system with it. You can feed, a quote downstream, feed engineering the CAD models, drawings behind these things. There's just a ton of outputs you can do with DriveWorks now online with it. And ultimately, I think it's going to be the future of a lot of people's products. I think more and more things are going modular. We've got a ton of stuff out there that are engineered to order, but you get these companies with all these custom standards, and you can really shave time to market off, by getting something like this, in place.
So kind of, we have a ton of data in here now. We have the body style, the head style, all the geometry pieces to it, all the options pieces of it. We've even gathered information. Now it's like, what do we do with all that data? John hinted at like pushing it to a CRM system. We can do that through tables, like you saw here. That's all I'm doing with this customers table is I've got a list of all of these previous customers that I've got, and I'm pulling from it. We can also push, right? We can push to tables. The other option is databases. So you have a SQL database that's you want to store this information into, we can push to that. In this example, we're actually going to create a document at the end of it. So after I've captured somebody's contact information, I hit next one more time and it's done. And then if I look at what it's created over here at the far right, this is just a template that comes from DriveWorks. You can do this with a Word doc, an Excel doc, XML, lots of different ways to push out the information, but it's capturing the name of the company, more importantly, who are we writing this to, information about the date it was captured. There's a calculation in here that's just saying plus 30 days, that the expiration for the quote. And then more importantly, filling out a line item quote. So custom guitar, and I'm even filling out what kind it is, right? It's going to pull in that this was an X type with these type. And even further background information, I can create multiple documents. This one's customer facing. We have internal facing ones that give me RGB values and all the things that I need to build and assemble this.
Greg and I kind of got to this screen in the presentation, and like ultimately, I'd love to show a full BOM, right? DriveWorks is 100% capable of that, right? But it certainly takes more configuration work than just giving it a drop, cost, with respect to that, right?
A little bit more than 12 hours.
Yeah, we would have put more than 12 hours into build the BOM all the way out. Because I'm sure you're aware the BOM's super nuanced and what shows on your BOM, as far as purchase items, things like that. You've got to put that logic into DriveWorks to get the full accurate, because it pushes things out. Really fast to market for a custom build, you're fast forwarding through a lot of the sales process for something that is going to be one of the existing options in a lot of respects, right? And it's just all about inputs on the way in, and that's all about what you capture and what you want to do with it downstream of the models. So.
John, you mentioned the website piece. I was running it through Administrator just because I just do that a lot, but you can even test it as you go on what it would look like on a website. So if I start up the little personal web edition, this little intranet thing, I'm not even connected to the internet. You can test out. Let me grab this. My Chrome has been weird, so bear with me while I use Edge. It's important too. If this is going to like a dealer network instead of the general public, you could have login information, protect it behind a login.
You can control what options are available to the DriveWorks project based on the user login, right? So if this is a sales rep configuration tool, right, you can have these sales reps trained in what they're selling, or they don't have the options yet, right? You can control all that logic in there as well.
But you would just run this the exact same way you would through Administrator. It's always a matter of testing, but I tried to make this so that no matter what size it was, the screen elements update pretty well. It's just writing rules that say this window is always half the size of the space that I have to work in the width. It's always the full amount in the height. So lots of rule writing and logic, but you would just use the exact same way.
Mildly slower, than the on-prem version of the thing, but if you might still pushing a 20 meg file, this thing will live update every time you look at the bottom, right?
We wanted to hit those main topics, but I'm happy to like dive deeper in the setup of it if you like, or if you have any other questions for John on how he builds these.
One more thing I'll throw out there, just to give you, some perspective on some of the other customer use cases we've seen for DriveWorks out there. Greg's been running the DriveWorks for quite some time. I think Colson's got his version of this. I don't know if you guys are off the ground with it yet or not, but think you guys have found how deep the rabbit hole gets. Some of that. They're doing custom casters, and kind of design to order there. I've seen Greg put together a project for custom, was it laser burn metal or something, where like somebody would throw a picture into this thing and then it would go, trace the image and lay out like whatever custom text they had into it for, home laser cutting, whatever material they wanted to build things. And it was literally the form would capture what they wanted this thing to say, and then the laser would spit out code to this thing at the end of it. Right? Like it's really wild how far you can take this. One of Greg's recent projects has been just absolutely enormous. It's for a company out in California, I believe. Yeah. And they build effectively grow room equipment, and they hit us up like, hey, we want to throw, as many of our racks into a rectangular room as possible, right? Sounds easy enough, right? Except the racks are 8 foot long, 4 foot long, 6 foot long, right? And this turned into not only a DriveWorks project, but an algorithm to figure out how to, most efficiently stack material into a room, right? Like this is what Amazon's doing with their warehouses, right? And Greg's been able to build a project around that to figure that out. And it's taken their business from like a sales rep estimating with a tape measure to their customer base can go online and say, my room is this big. It populates a giant quote of everything they'll need to store materials, right? And there's just tons and tons of rules into it, right? If they have these lights on the thing, then you have to have spacing between the racks. They can't butt up to one another. So there's all these options that drive the algorithm for how this thing works. One thing I will say about learning DriveWorks, you're going to get real familiar with logic statements, right? That is a huge portion of the software is kind of an if-then-else logic and background of things, right?
I won't get too deep into it, but how we're controlling what's shown in the 3D window is with this 3D document, and this area here is controlling it. So I've got all of these different nodes: the headstock, the fretboard, the hardware, and a simple one is, well, I don't want any of these to show if the tritone, the signature model, is selected. So there's just an is suppressed rule. So whether we suppress it or not, and it's just like an Excel if statement. If the signature series return is build your own, don't suppress it. Otherwise, suppress it. So that, and you build and build and build your toolbox of different functions, and that's how you drive the 3D model.
And that logic that Greg had pulled up there, one thing I find nice with it is it color codes when it's got what it wants, right? So as you're typing, if it doesn't like the syntax or something, like that text will not pop up. If you're not familiar with the way that works in Excel or even like SQL, like it'll start for you syntax errors and things, right? And that's probably half the battle in trying to figure out how to configure a product is one, interrogating the CAD model to figure out what it is that you want to do with it for your configuration, and then it's the logic behind what to show based on set information, right? And ultimately, for me, that's super easy because I've designed every one of these instruments, right, for the last 10, 15 years or something, right? So I was able to, in 5 minutes, data dump what I wanted it to do to Greg, right? It's not so fast when you do the real world customers that have complex products, and you probably don't know the entire product line for what we're talking about, right? And maybe multiple groups of your organization, to be able to do that, right? Golson's got 5 divisions, 6 plants, and it's layered of all these things, right? And then just the different kind of categories of caster, instantly throw this thing into tons and tons of different options, right? Because there's light, medium, medical grade, right? So, the premise behind it's definitely a project, and I don't want anybody to walk away with this thinking it's not, but ultimately, it's a business case for the sales cycle of the product, right? There's costs associated to the software with some subscription service, and then there's going to be some either train it and you figure out how to do it yourself, right? And we've got training options for that, or kind of our most successful cases have been a combo of both some training as well as you're working with an admin to teach you how to build, right, and you learn how to fish as you go, which is really similar to what we're doing with the managed implementation of Colson at this point. And the goal being that you're dangerous with your own, project when it's all said and done, right? One thing that is really nice here, very portable. Like there's a pack and go feature that takes all of this, right? Like Greg built this entire thing. You can click one button, you give me that whole project, and I can bring it in my computer and go, right? So as we do build a lot of this stuff, we'll just port it over at the end to a customer server and set it all up. To pull off something like this, well, you need DriveWorks,
DriveWorks Pro, and DriveWorks Live.
And the Live is what's publishing it up to the web, right? Pro is all you'll need if you don't want to go to the web, right?
Correct.
If the goal is to fire this thing off with a salesperson that has a VPN to your server with access to it, you can go through the configuration process with this DriveWorks Pro, right? You want to get out to the wider customer base, obviously you're not VPNing them all into your server, right? That's where you get into DriveWorks Live that's kind of broadcasting that over the web. There's some additional automation and things as well that can be used with this DriveWorks Automate.
Autopilot.
And this is also PDM compatible, so we can not only generate these models, dump them out to the network drive, it can actually push them out to PDM, check them in, notify people that that is there, right? It can build like spec sheets in the background for things. And one of the things that I'm really kind of trying to turn some customers onto in this, and it's something that Greg and I actually started to work on, is this can be a full-on quoting utility without any CAD models involved, right? A lot of customers are trying to do this with their CRM or their ERP systems, right? And ultimately, like DriveWorks is really custom built code, right? I looked at products like Manage, PDM, and other things that generate our quotes for Real Engineer. And the conclusion I came to was, while the line items are super easy to do on a tool like that, and I could get a BOM, a quote, right? It really fell on its face when it came to custom SOW every time, right? If you call me for an upgrade, it's the same as every upgrade. It's not, right? It's going to be a custom standard, right? The line items are always the same, but like your server spec might be different. You might need a different SQL version upgraded, and there's always custom information I got to put on the SOW. And what I found was, DriveWorks is really awesome at that, right? You can have all these different forms, all these different areas where you key information, and then DriveWorks is able to leverage outside file types to be able to capture and deal with a lot of information, like Word, Excel, things like that. So, like in that project, Greg, ripped apart our existing Excel spreadsheet, which is this macro Excel file on steroids that he basically parsed down into our coding utility, right? And then distilled that down to individual Excel spreadsheets, right? And at that point, there isn't a CAD model in sight, right? It's actually building quotes for services for the organization. So just kind of open your mind up to that. It's not only a very powerful and integrated CAD tool with respect to automation, it's also very capable of automating a lot of quoting functionalities and configurations of all kinds, right? And really where a lot of the other configurator products in the market fall short is the CAD integration, right? There's a ton of other configuration products in the market. And ultimately, most of the customers I've talked to that have implemented those have called us despite sinking tons of money into those to see what they can do with DriveWorks, because they're really running into roadblocks with how it ties into the modeling side and it is able to generate CAD models, right? DriveWorks is probably the longest standing, configurator that's been tied into the API of SolidWorks to push this, on the market. They've been at it for 20 plus years or something anyways. It's almost as old.
So we wanted to focus on the sales configurator part of it, but we can push and drive the CAD models. So I can change a conveyor length, width, and height. I can change the options on whether they're tall rails, short rails, a bed, or rollers, what color it is again, calculating price the entire time. But in this case, with our guitar example, it was we don't need the CAD models, right? We've got the CAD models, so we know what those are going to be. In this case, we don't know what the CAD models might be because we're deriving those with sizes here.
Almost infinite variability Greg's showing like a drive, driven by a bar here, right? For a conveyor system like this, I mean, customer might call up and want, 83.56 inches, right? And like the permutations and possibilities here are out the window now, right? Like you go down to 3 decimal place, like we're not even able to calculate it anymore. Where DriveWorks at that point is driving the dimension of the CAD model, right? So now it's just going to push in there and drive lengths within that, right? I've seen dozens of customers attempt to do this with equations in SolidWorks. Anybody try it yet? Does not go too well most of the time. It like, in theory, it works great, right? But when you actually go into practice on it, there's a bunch of C++ prereqs that have to be working properly. There's tons of logic that it runs. I'll say this, SolidWorks is not amazing running through that math. It's quite inefficient in its equations capabilities. And they are time dependent. So the order that you put them in can just break everything depending on what you do with them, right? So SolidWorks fairly recently has come up with a way to reorder equations, which is really cool because in the early days you just start over. But even then, I've had tons and tons of customers go down that road, and almost all of them end up calling us about DriveWorks because you just end up with this super heavy model that only one person knows how to use, right? If they leave the organization, like nobody wants to touch this thing because it'll break, right? And what we're able to do in DriveWorks is as we are, doing this to the model and getting it prepped for DriveWorks, we're stripping out tons of that intelligence in the CAD model. They can get what it's designed to be, just a CAD model with driven dimensions or driving dimensions in it, right? And then DriveWorks is just capturing those values in the form and pushing it back to the CAD model as it goes and does its job. So you see, as I've been talking here, I've been through and built the conveyor that I, button click through and select it, but takes substantially longer, right? It's going into the CAD model, literally opening it up in RAM, changing the length of this thing, spitting it back out, and then dumping it off to a 244 millimeter long, 580 millimeter wide, conveyor system, right? That prior to this took either a ton of equations or an engineer to go and do a save as, open this thing, modify it, hope there was no in-context relationships to be broke during the save as operation, right? And then make a new drawing set out of this thing, right? And DriveWorks, you just basically strip all that out and leave this thing a skeleton model as it goes and does its job.
So like with the rail lengths, would you get the limits for the length?
Yeah, so you can do a couple of different things there, right? You can set limits, right? Which we find most customers are doing off of their equipment, right? If it's like a piece of sheet metal and our press brake can't bend something longer than this, that's the cap that you can do, or it goes up to 2 different pieces of metal, right? And you can do things like that. This is kind of infinite slider, right? You can do, notched sliders, so it goes up by 10 millimeters at a time or 100 millimeters at a time if you want. Like, the sky's the limit with that. Like, you can do both a kind of high-low range or individuals.
It's something we talk about when I do implementations too, is that the form design becomes important then. As the person building the projects, you want to make it dummy-proof, so somebody can't pick an option that you can't manufacture. So, right. So that's why we have min, max limits on each one of these length, width, height sliders. Yep. I did a lot of that with the Grow company, where their racks can sit vertically. They have holes every 2 inches, right? But when there's a splice, you can't use 2 holes above it. You can't use 2 holes below it. So does the rack land below or above, right? And it's just, you sit down, you think about it, come up with a rule.
And a lot of that's based on the reality of the product, the reality of the manufacturing equipment, right? Like, tons of customers are limited by what they can buy from a material standpoint, right? Like, if you think about lumber, you're getting basically a 4 by 8 sheet of plywood to cut this thing, right? Home Depot's only got so many plants to wood that you can go to. And as you're probably familiar with the weldments, right? Like, cut off 2x4s don't make a 4-foot section, right? Like, you can't just weld this stuff back together. So, like, ultimately, you got to just build that logic into the model so that, it makes the most manufacturable product. But that does take some time to figure out, right? Ultimately, like, we don't know those limitations, right? And that's where the kind of communication comes in with the customer for that.
So, just an idea here. Large design review. And I can show you the form that someone has to fill out to make this model as well. But this was the rack company. Where they're typing in length, width, height of a room, and we're filling that room with as many racks as we can. And as many trays as we can vertically.
And as many like possibilities as this thing had, permutations, this ended up being months of project work back and forth with building this all out. They kept coming back and adding more options as to what they wanted as they go, right? And Greg's been basically delivering a working, functioning version of this back to them. Well, or something, right?
My suggestion there, just from doing this for 6 years now, is pick, I'll call them winnable chunks, right? So don't go sky's the limit right away because you're not going to be able to hit milestones where it's usable. So pick milestones where it's usable. Pick what's going to be your most effective group or product line. Tackle that first. Grow from there.
And to that point, it was probably about a year ago, we had a car wash company come to us. Basically, they wanted a completely customizable, configurable car wash in the DriveWorks. Like, cool. Like, you sure you understand the quote that's coming your way? Like, this is a massive project, right? Like this thing could have any number of stations, right? And any order of what they need, right? And any building layout, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, they didn't move forward, and it was not necessarily driven on cost. What ended up taking that engagement was they don't have all of the models in SolidWorks that they want to drive to actually make this work. Like they got really deep into the conversation, and like the engineer manager just had this hard swallow. Like it's going to take us like 3 years to get the model rolled around, and even you to then automate all of this stuff. And we're just not there yet, right? They were a 2D company and just bought SolidWorks and wanted this, but just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to model all the stuff. And if you now outsource all the modeling to somebody, the cost just tripled or something, right? So, they had to walk away just from like the sheer realization that they're putting the cart before the horse on that. But like ultimately, it's and they're one of the companies that has a full-on online configurator, and then found out they can't actually drive CAD model. So now you can order a custom car wash on the internet, and nobody knows what it looks like, but any drawings for it, and I guess we could start engineering, right? So all they have is a sales configurator that may or may not be possible to build, right? So, and that's where that engagement really comes from. But, it's really, I think, worth looking at if you've got a very modular product, right? It doesn't need to be as cut and paste as mine, right? But just something that has kind of a middle end, X amount of sizes, things like that. Or, driving out to, what lengths are going to be applicable, right? If you genuinely view your business as engineer to order and every machine is different, DriveWorks probably isn't for you, right? But 90% of the people that tell me that every one of their machines is different has a lot of similarity between their machines. Like ultimately, at the end of the day, I get down to the fact that no one is the exact same, but like ultimately, I use the 80% of it, right? If we can get you 80% of the way to a design with automation, and then an engineer picks it up, right? So you got 20% of the work left to do instead of trying to go get this thing and model it yourself, copy and paste, and pack and go, swap references. Any other questions?
So say somebody needs a configuration you don't have model, you don't have configuration or something, and then on that,
So what it technically does there, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, is we're not going back in and pushing a config into the model.
You can.
Right? You can. So it's never been my recommendation. Most of the time with DriveWorks, we're making an independent model from the original. So and if you don't have that particular configuration, using that word out of the SolidWorks sense, but machine sense, right? It will save off a copy of all those files until they do assembly and do drawing off.
But it can definitely push a config into a file. Say I have 18 different screw sizes. I run a DriveWorks project and type in a 19th. It will put. We have the possibility to update that model and push a 19th config in there. But more often than not, and this is what we did with Colson when I was working with you guys, is that we actually strip the configs. Like the assembly gets generated and then strip all the configs that's not used because it's its own thing.
Because of file size.
Yeah. So
the problem with pushing that config back into your assembly is you do that 100 times, and the assembly's unmanageable.
So we had like 6 or 7 different files with like 8 or 9 different configs each that we were putting in assembly. So it was still a heavy assembly at the end when it generated each time. We would have it generate the assembly, and then DriveWorks has some rules at the end where we can say, okay, go delete all the configs that aren't active.
From a driver standpoint,
Make something custom, organize piece of parts so that they can go to the time, reorders for them, you've got to match all pieces of this.
So how I structure DriveWorks projects is almost the same. Let's see if this works. Is almost the exact same every single time. We have the DriveWorks group, which is you can have multiple projects in a group. So let's say the configurations got complicated enough with these guitars that we wanted to have a project per guitar, body style instead of all in one project. So a group can hold multiple projects. So I have a group file here, and wherever I've stored that group file, I store a folder for each project. So in here is the Drive projects file. Then I have content, which is stuff that just helps me with usually like the form. So you'll see a lot of like images and things in here, logos, textures, and then all of my pictures that I'm using to say, grab this picture if it's selected, grab this if it's not. And then CAD-wise, you can organize it just like you organize any other CAD. The folder can be in PDM. It can check out and check in files. What I like that we can't really do in PDM very well is we can push to properties of the file. So let's say you have a crazy smart part numbering system that you can't pull off in PDM very well. We can do that in DriveWorks. We just push the property to the part number.
you name the file that as well.
Yep.
So the question becomes, in a custom piece of machinery or even my guitar, right? What's the unique parts and what should be referencing standard parts? Is really what it boils down to, right? And those are decisions you got to make. You know,
We can do both, and we can do a mix of them too. So like the screws.
There's literally 3 parts on there are customized. Everything else is part of the store model, right? Most machineries, probably not that ratio, but ultimately, DriveWorks can be set to reference existing, libraries and models or general frankly part files.
What's different here is because we're not doing any CAD, is I usually have a master files folder. And this is where I'm sticking my original CAD documents that DriveWorks grabs, copies, spits out, or grabs and just reutilizes because we're always pointing back to the original nut, bolt, thing that's not going to change. Yep.
You can literally capture whatever you want. It can be a key value, it can be serial value, it can be a combo of things. You literally write a rule for what you want file names, properties to be. It's very powerful in that regard. I appreciate everybody's time.
Just, this is is almost impossible to answer, but if you took your guitar shop and what you've set up, what would the spend, like from a business owner's perspective, where's that order of magnitude to do what you smile? Where's that order of magnitude to price something that you present to an owner, whether for him to invest in this product?
So DriveWorks itself, so what we showed today is what, the two pieces are 12 a piece?
6 piece.
6 piece. So you're about $12,000 worth of software. It's the DriveWorks Pro and DriveWorks Live.
And which on the web?
That puts you on the web, yeah. I think the quote might be another 6. We were debating that, now we're good, okay. So getting the quote is included in that. I don't know what the general maintenance is off your head for DriveWorks.
I don't have
It's usually about 25% seat costs, right?
the annual subscription.
Yeah. And then, realistically, we didn't quite get exactly what I wanted in 12 hours, but let's build that out to a week project time. You know what I mean? So we're at about 10 grand there in services to get off the ground. So ballpark range of what you saw is going to be 24 plus subs. Something like that. Then
Does that get you to a point where you have a quotable order for the customer and a drawing set for fabrication?
Similar.
pretty close to that.
Yeah,
That's why I blew it up to
there
40
wouldn't be
hours.
much to add, spitting out CAD and drawings on the back end.
We chose not to do the CAD models for this presentation just to show you don't need them, but most customers, I think, is going to want a set of drawings.
Yeah.
Right? And realistically, instead of using the Drive 3D models, we can just use the SolidWorks models and do the same thing as a spin out thing. So really, the time suck becomes how complex is your product, right? What's the deliverables? What values are we capturing along the way? And then how nasty is that quote, right? If you go super top end, like here's a bullet point line item that rolls up cost, like I did, fast. If you want every line item and its cost, it's take longer. Okay. Sub-assembly structure, it's more time to that, right? So it all depends on how layered it is. What we found is generally 2, maybe 3 sessions on a deep project is enough to scope out what customers are generally looking for. So time investment up front is probably going to be, a couple of hours just to, get a good idea of what it is that you want out of the product.
Anything special for the live version to live on? I mean, you have to work with your IAD or your web host, whatever, to what if somebody comes up with it. If you're using the live for the web presentation, I mean, what services do you have to request from your web dev?
Yep. So there are templates that DriveWorks provides, and then you just need a website address that we can point to. If you want to embed it in your current website that you have going, then you need to start talking to your web devs.
Thank you.
All right, looks like they're breaking over there. Thanks, everybody.